So I just wanted to share with you all really quickly. I cannot believe that I am still up, but avoid these blunders or watch your podcast disappear. So I don't know, many of you may know that I started a podcast on April 1st called The Afterwork Entrepreneur, and the downloads were going great. I was averaging about 300 downloads per episode. And then it trickled down. Well, guess what? My biggest platform, which is Apple Podcasts, all of a sudden it disappeared. And so I kept wondering, like, I was still doing all the things, promoting it. I went back to make sure that I was doing the template. So, just really quickly, these are the reasons that I believe that my podcast disappeared. One, you cannot use directory logos. And what does that mean? You can't say that your podcast is found on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music. You can't put those logos on your podcast art. You may mention it in a post, but you cannot use the directory logos. That's first. Number two, don't put too many words on the podcast art or the episode if you decide to feature a guest or change your podcast art per episode. Putting too many words can cause you to get undirected. Number three, your podcast description should be at least a paragraph. Now, I use a tool called Cast Magic, and it is fantastic. And it does all of the hard work for me and creates a summary of the podcast. And number four, I have my podcast on Spotify. And as of a week ago, the audio file itself now comes in MP4A. Well, Spotify no longer accepts MP4A. You must have MP3. And if you want to, you may want to convert a file to from MP4A or MP4A to MP3 because as of a week ago, Spotify only takes MP3s. So I corrected the images on my episodes. I removed the logos. I took the words off and just left the name of the podcast and whatever the episode was. I beefed up the descriptions because I used that handy tool. And just in case you are listed on Spotify, they only take MP3s now. And after I corrected those things, I resubmitted to my podcast to Apple Podcasts. Well, first of all, I called support and they were closed, but I resubmitted my podcast and my podcast showed up immediately. So I corrected those four things and now I'm a happy woman and now I can go to sleep because it was bothering me. I could not find my podcast, and Apple Podcasts accounts for 90% of my visibility with my podcast. So I hope this helps someone out and you periodically check your podcast because I think it had been quite a while. Even though I was checking my stats weekly, I was not checking the directories or checking the individual directory stats. So my podcast is back up. So if you subscribed on Apple Podcasts to my podcast, it's back up there. And just in a short amount of time, I saw my downloads spike. So hope that was helpful.